The letter that changed everything. When Tiger Woods walked into that federal courtroom, he wasn't there to make headlines. He wasn't there to defend a trophy or chase a record. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. He came quietly, to clear his name in a case that barely involved him. But the judge presiding over the case had other plans. What started as a routine testimony turned into a personal takedown until the courtroom witnessed something they weren't ready for. Because Tiger didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't flinch. And what happened next didn't just flip the power in the room, it became one of the most unforgettable lessons in silent strength that bench had ever seen. I was standing in the hotel lobby with an envelope in my hand. The name on the sender line made my stomach drop. It wasn't a brand deal. It wasn't a tournament invite. It was a subpoena. The concierge had handed it to me like it was nothing, just another envelope and a stack of room deliveries. But I knew better. The weight of it hit before I even tore the seal. United States District Court. Civil Action Number 14, Joe 2988. Presiding Judge, Anthony R. Callahan. I'd never seen the name before, but I would remember it for the rest of my life. Tiger Woods has stood in front of millions, on greens soaked in pressure, on podiums lined with microphones. But there's a different kind of pressure when your name is being dragged into a courtroom for something you didn't do. An ex-business partner, someone I barely kept in touch with, was being accused of real estate fraud. They said he'd used my name to help lock in investors, that I'd endorsed properties I hadn't even heard of. So now they wanted me to testify. Not as a witness, not as an expert, as a warning. The press hadn't picked it up yet. The cameras weren't following. But I knew they would. One wrong quote and they'd turn the courtroom into a circus. But before we get to the screaming, the cameras, and the breakdown that made a federal courtroom go silent, let's rewind just 48 hours. Before we dive back into the story, I've got a quick favor to ask. I'm working toward a goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and every single one counts. It would mean the world if you'd hit that subscribe button. All right, back to the story. The setup no one saw coming. Do you remember the first time someone looked at you like they already hated you? For me, it was Judge Anthony Callahan. Cold eyes, tight jaw, and a smile that didn't touch his face. It was supposed to be a procedural hearing, nothing major. I wasn't being accused of a crime. I was just there to answer questions, set the record straight. But from the moment I stepped into that courtroom, I knew the room wasn't neutral. I've learned how to read people. You don't win Masters without it. And Callahan? He wasn't hiding anything. He cut off my lawyer mid-sentence, sustained every objection from the prosecution like he'd memorized them in advance. When I said, with all due respect, he smirked like I'd insulted the flag. The courtroom itself felt colder than it should have. Not the temperature, just the energy, like even the walls were watching. Judge Callahan was known for cracking down on celebrity entitlement. He made headlines for putting an actor in contempt after a traffic citation. But this wasn't discipline. This was something else. He wanted to embarrass me. He wanted to make an example. I sat at the witness table, hands folded, every answer calm. I wasn't about to play into it. But the more measured I got, the more aggressive he became. You could feel it boiling underneath the surface. The kind of energy that doesn't stay quiet for long. And I was right. Because the next morning, Judge Callahan didn't just raise his voice. He lost it. When the gavel became a weapon. Callahan slammed his gavel mid-sentence. "You will not use this courtroom as a redemption tour, Mr. Woods." The crack echoed like a gunshot through the chambers. Everything stopped. The murmurs, the typing, even the court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't challenged the court. I was halfway through answering a question about the timeline of a business dinner, but the judge was already red in the face. Across the room, a reporter's hand froze mid-scribble. Someone's phone buzzed, unanswered. My attorney leaned in, but I didn't move, because I'd seen this before. Not in courtrooms, on golf courses, in boardrooms, in back offices where decisions get made long before the door closes. Men like Callahan don't lose their temper because they're threatened by facts. They lose it when they feel ignored. He wanted me to push back, to break character, to snap so he could frame me as the arrogant athlete who thought he was above the law. But I wasn't playing his game. I sat still, composed, hands folded on the table. Callahan's breathing was audible now. He adjusted his robe like it was choking him. "Do I make myself clear?" he barked. I blinked, once, slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." No extra words, no expression. But that silence, it didn't just land, it hit. And for the first time since the trial began, he flinched. Tiger's silence hits harder than words. No reaction, no defense. Just stillness. And that stillness, it did something none of us expected. It exposed something raw. Because the longer I stayed quiet, the louder his anger sounded. Callahan leaned back like he needed space from his own voice. The courtroom, once tense, had turned awkward. The reporters weren't typing anymore. They were watching, and it was then I realized something important. This wasn't about evidence. It never had been. This was theater. And Callahan wasn't trying to find the truth. He was trying to steal the spotlight. He wanted a headline, a soundbite, a fall from grace moment he could preside over. But silence is powerful when it comes from someone who's used to being heard. And I gave him nothing. No ego, no outburst, no ammunition. He shuffled papers just to fill the air, cleared his throat twice, picked up his pen, put it back down. I'd seen golf crowds hold their breath before a putt. This was like that, but heavier. Across the aisle, the jury looked uncomfortable. One woman kept glancing between the judge and me like she was trying to figure out what exactly she was supposed to believe. And that's the thing about stillness. When someone throws everything they have at you, and you don't even flinch, it doesn't make you look weak. It makes them look unhinged. The courtroom didn't know what was coming next. But I did. Because when truth meets ego, ego always cracks first. Whispers from the jury box. The silence was still hanging when it started. A quiet cough, a shuffled foot, the soft creak of someone adjusting in their seat. Then a whisper, too low to make out but enough to stir the air. The jury wasn't watching me anymore. They were watching him. Judge Callahan sat perched like a man trying to climb back into his own authority. But the weight of the moment was already pulling him down. One juror, a woman in a burgundy blazer, mid-40s, with the kind of eyes that memorize everything, glanced at me, then quickly away. But not before I saw it, that flicker of doubt, that shift from judgment to something closer to guilt, because even they could feel it now. This wasn't justice. It was punishment, not for a crime, for a reputation, for daring to walk into a courtroom with composure and not apology. Another juror, a man with glasses too big for his face, leaned back and crossed his arms, like he'd suddenly remembered he was allowed to be uncomfortable. The energy in the room had changed, not drastically, but enough. Enough that the truth had a crack to get through, and it didn't need volume, it just needed the right moment. Which came next, quietly without warning, when my lawyer reached into her briefcase and slid a thin folder across the table. The truth on paper. It wasn't flashy, no gold seals, no oversized headlines, just facts. My attorney, calm as ever, opened the folder like it was routine, but it wasn't. Inside were 3 documents, a signed statement from the associate who'd dragged my name into this in the first place, saying I had no knowledge, no involvement, no investment. A series of emails with timestamps that showed I wasn't even in the country during the key meetings. And one page that changed everything. A forged signature, not just off by a little, off by a mile. The strokes were wrong. The spacing too wide. Even the T didn't curve like mine always did. My lawyer held it up gently like it might break. Your Honor, Exhibit 3A, submitted into evidence. Callahan didn't lean forward. He didn't ask to see it. He just stared, stone still. But the courtroom moved. A few heads in the gallery turned. A murmur flickered and died. On the jury bench, someone adjusted their glasses again. Because no matter what the judge had said about my motives, my presence, my past, what was on that page didn't lie. It was right there. Proof that I didn't belong in that chair. Proof that someone else had used my name. And that Judge Callahan had let the weight of who I was distract him from the weight of what actually happened. He didn't say a word. But his silence didn't feel powerful anymore. It felt exposed. The assistant who spoke out, she wasn't supposed to be there. No subpoena, no press announcement, just a quiet woman in a navy blazer seated in the back row of the gallery. But the moment the forged signature hit the record, she stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady but tight. I need to speak. The courtroom froze. My attorney looked confused. The bailiff stepped forward, but before anyone could stop her, she continued. My name is Jennifer Alcott. I served as Judge Callahan's executive assistant for 6 years. I know I'm not on the witness list, but I have information relevant to this case. Callahan didn't move, didn't even blink. Jennifer held her ground. The judge has had a bias against Mr. Woods since at least 2010. Gasps. A few heads snapped toward the bench. He said it himself, multiple times, called him a disgrace to the country club, said guys like that always think they can buy their way out. Callahan's lips parted slightly, like he might object. But what could he say? That she was lying? Jennifer pulled a USB drive from her coat pocket. There are emails, voice memos. I archived them when I left. My lawyer motioned for the bailiff to collect it. The weight shifted, not with shouting, not with force, with truth. And the man behind the bench? He suddenly looked very, very small. The courtroom turns, reporters scrambled like someone had flipped a switch. Laptops open, pens racing, cameras rising just above legal limits. Even the court stenographer, usually mechanical and unfazed, paused mid-keystroke and glanced up. On the jury bench, posture changed. One juror leaned forward like he didn't want to miss a word. Another whispered behind her hand. The judge didn't shout this time. He just sat there, still, pale. Because now it wasn't my reputation on trial. It was his. Jennifer's statement played in the minds of everyone in the room like an echo that wouldn't fade. Disgrace to the country club. Guys like that. Bias since 2010. The words weren't just damaging. They were radioactive. I stayed seated. Still hadn't raised my voice. Didn't need to. Because the room was doing it for me now. You could feel it, the shift, from doubt to clarity, from spectacle to something closer to justice. Even Callahan's clerk stopped typing. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. My lawyer leaned in. They're not looking at you the same way anymore? I didn't respond, just nodded, because she was right. Whatever story they'd walked into the courtroom believing, about me, about my past, it had cracked, and cracks let the light in. The judge tried to straighten his robe, tried to clear his throat, but the authority he once wore like armor, it didn't fit anymore. And in that silence, for the first time, it was Callahan who looked like the defendant. The apology. No one expected. It didn't come quickly, didn't come confidently either, but when it came, it silenced the room. Callahan leaned over the bench, both hands gripping the wood like he needed something to anchor him. His voice, once sharp and scolding, came out rough. "Mr. Woods," he started, then stopped, swallowed. "I may have overstepped." Just 6 words, but they hit the air like an earthquake. A reporter's pen stopped moving. A juror's eyebrows lifted. My lawyer looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard it right. Even I had to pause for a second. Because judges don't apologize, especially not to men like me. Not in rooms like this, not after everything. But there it was. It wasn't polished. It wasn't complete. But it was real. He didn't say he was wrong. He didn't say sorry. But in that one strained sentence, the power dynamic flipped. The judge who shouted, who postured, who treated the bench like a stage, now looked like a man trying to crawl back into his own skin. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't clap. It just held still. Because everyone knew they'd just witnessed something rare. Not just accountability, but the moment pride gave way to truth. And in the center of it all, I still hadn't raised my voice. Grace under fire. I stood. Not triumphant, not smug, just steady. The kind of calm that doesn't come from winning. It comes from knowing you never needed to fight in the first place. "I didn't come here to fight," I said, my voice even, no edge. "I came to tell the truth." No one interrupted. No judge, no bailiff, no reporter clicking a camera. They just listened. And that, I think, is what stayed with people. Not the headlines, not the tension, not even the judge's apology, but the way stillness won. The way clarity didn't need chaos to be heard. I didn't walk out of that courtroom a hero. I didn't want to. I walked out the same man I walked in, just no longer carrying the weight of someone else's assumptions. Outside, the press swarmed, microphones pushed forward, voices layered on top of each other. "Mr. Woods, did the judge admit fault? Was the apology enough? Are you planning to sue for defamation?" I didn't answer. Because sometimes, silence is still the loudest thing you can say. I got into the car, closed the door, and looked out the window one last time. Callahan hadn't moved, still behind the bench. Still gripping that desk like it might disappear if he let go. And maybe that was the real story. Not the outburst, not the apology. But what happens when a man lets the truth catch up and finds out it never needed to run? This story was intense, but the one waiting for you on the right? It's even more insane. Click it now. You won't believe what happens next.